Hey guys, it's me, Sister Christa. Have you guys ever experienced something you wish would rather not have happened? Things like being grounded all weekend, forgetting your lines at the school play, canceling your birthday party. I don't know about you guys, but all of those things listed, I wish would rather not ever happen. They're kind of the worst. Now, if I had to guess, I would think you guys would rather not us have this conversation that we're about to have again about sex and relationships at church. But you know what, guys? I know you can handle this. And this week, we're gonna go into something I think is really, really important for us to be talking about. But before we get into that, I wanna ask you guys a question. How many of you have expectations about dating? Now, I'm not talking about the expectations you have for yourself dating. I'm talking about the expectations other people have about you dating. Maybe your parent doesn't think you should even think about dating right now. Maybe you have an older sibling who's telling you to just ignore the person who's crushing on you right now. Maybe your best friend is already planning your wedding day on that person you have a crush on, and she's writing her bridesmaid speech as we speak. I know when I was in middle school, I really just wasn't that into dating. Although I did have crushes, and it just literally seemed like everybody I knew was dating, but I was so focused on learning about my violin and just really getting into that scene within the youth philharmonics around me that I just really wasn't that much into dating. So I really didn't have these huge expectations set upon myself because, well, my parents didn't have to set any because I really just wasn't dating. But I did go ahead and interview a few of my own gym friends and the friends I knew around that could give you guys kind of an idea of the expectations they had while in middle school for dating. Silif, what were some expectations your parents might have had of you while you were dating in middle school?
Oh, I wasn't allowed to date.
Really?
No,
He was like, not allowed to date. All through middle school? Really?
not really.
Dang.
I mean, I had girlfriends, but
You weren't supposed to.
Allegedly, I wasn't supposed to.
Allegedly. What about you, Caleb? Middle school.
I just stayed to myself, middle school.
Did your parents have any rules for you or anything?
Well, no, not really. They just didn't encourage it.
They were like, no,
So-
please don't date.
Wherever you got to high school, kind of ventured out.
What was your expectations in
They
middle
didn't
school?
have none.
Really?
I was a good kid, yeah.
Were you really? Look at they were like laughing. They were like, I don't know if he was a good kid. What were your expectations your parents had of you when you were dating in middle school?
I wasn't allowed to date in
Really?
middle school. I mean, I guess I could have a boyfriend, but no, there's no
Yeah, it was not allowed.
dating.
So in middle school, when you were in middle school, think back of it. Think back to it. I know it was not that far for you at all.
Yeah.
But when you were allowed to date, like, were there any expectations when you were dating in middle school, or were you not allowed to date in middle school?
I didn't. Well, you had girlfriends, but you didn't really date.
You didn't really date? No. Can you guys relate to any of that? Maybe you've been given expectations about dating, but they aren't really necessarily what you have for yourself. Or maybe you've never really thought about your own expectations when it comes to dating and relationships. And what you need to know is that these thoughts are completely normal, and we're gonna be getting to the truth about sex and relationships. And one thing I want us to have a real talk about is deciding whether or not we want to even be in a relationship or not. And one thing I want us to have real talk about is the choice that we have whether we want to be in a relationship or not. Now, before I go on, I want to ask you guys to do something for me. I want you to legit think about every couple you have seen in any movie or sitcom, whatever. I want you to think about those couples right now. What do dating and relationships look like in those shows? Maybe they sound like two people dating. They fall in love, and then they get married, and they live happily ever after, right? And maybe that's the way you've seen most of the relationships kind of tend to go in your own life. Your parents or grandparents have been married for a long time. Your older siblings are all dating and they want to be in relationships. Your teacher is engaged. Maybe your friends all seem to be really interested in dating too. It seems like being in a relationship is something that everybody seems to desire, whether it's right now or eventually later in their lives. And honestly, that sort of makes it seem like that's kind of the way it's supposed to go for all of us. Like dating and being in a relationship is something we're supposed to just kind of plan for, and almost as if it's just literally one path we're supposed to be taking. Now, if you're somebody who's curious about dating or wants to date, this doesn't really sound like a bad thing at all. But what if you're not a person who wants to date? What if you really don't want to be dating? Or you're just not sure what you want when it comes to relationships? Or you know that right now and maybe even always, dating and relationships aren't something you want. Is it really an option to choose something else for your life? You know, a lot of times it feels like the answer is no, doesn't it? Whether it's because of the rules or expectations put on us, or just what we've seen around us. It's easy to think that when it comes to something like dating and relationships, there's really just one option. And if we don't choose that option, and if we don't want to date now or even when we're older, it can sometimes kind of feel like, well, we missed out. We may start to wonder, is it okay if I never date or get married? If I choose not to be in a relationship, will people think there's something wrong with me? Or what if nobody wants to be in a relationship with me? Is the entire point of life just to get married and have kids? Will God be disappointed if I don't do those things? Can God still use me for cool and amazing things even if I don't get married or date or have a relationship? If you've asked yourself any of these questions, I'm so glad you guys are here, because this is the place that we can have real talk about these issues. It's also a place where we can discover what is true about these things. When it comes to pressures, expectations, and choices we have about things like dating and relationships, here's what we know is true. If your path in dating and relationships doesn't look exactly the way everybody thinks it should, it's okay. In fact, I can guarantee you that even if dating and relationships are not a major part of your life, you definitely won't have to wonder if you're missing out. How do I know? Well, it's because of what Jesus said about the whole thing. And knowing Jesus changes everything, including the way we see relationships. If there is anybody who isn't afraid to have real talk about anything, it's Jesus. When he was alive on earth, he made a point to tell people the truth about life, the choices they were making, and what God's best for us really looks like. And the good news for us is that the people who knew and followed Jesus then wrote down what they heard and saw so that we can read about it today. We're going to look at a couple of things that Jesus' closest friends and followers recorded about Jesus' time here on earth. And they are things that can help us shift our thinking when it comes to not just our relationship status, but the whole point of our life here on earth. Before we get into it though, let me set the scene for you. Jesus spent a whole lot of his time on earth teaching and preaching. He shared stories and lessons and messages to help people understand things about God and about life. While Jesus was here on earth, he did a lot of preaching and teaching. He helped people really understand about life and God and how that all connected together. One of the most famous sermons is actually known as the Sermon on the Mount. This is just a fancy way of saying that Jesus delivered this particular message on, you guessed it, a mountain. And while the entire message is pretty cool, there's one part in particular that I think can help us understand what our focus in life should be all about. Let's go ahead and take a look. Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 to 16 from the Message says, "You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors of the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine, keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up to God, this generous Father in heaven." I love the way Jesus puts this. You know, when we're following Jesus in our life, there's just really one simple thing we need to be doing: to reflect who God is to the world around us, to be a light that shines God's love, to live so boldly and brightly that nothing can hide it. Because when we make that our focus, people can't help but notice. It's like a light in the darkness. When we use our gifts and passions and lives to reflect God to the world around us, people will see it. They'll notice, and maybe it will lead them to turn their light on and start following Jesus too. That's the point. As followers of Jesus, we're supposed to live our lives so that our light shines out of us. When we make that our focus, we know that we're not missing out on anything in our lives. Now, you guys may be thinking, that's really cool and all, Sister Christa, but what has this got to do with me dating or not? And that's a great question. See, like I said earlier, there's a lot of ideas about what the point of life is. Some people see it as dating, relationships, and eventually getting married. Sometimes other Christians may lead us into believing that if we're not dating or if we're not married, that we're somehow missing out on something or that something may be wrong with us. But you know what? That kind of thinking just isn't true. In fact, low-key, that completely misses the whole point. Jesus calls us to live a life that reflects God. And as a people made in the image of God, we can do that all on our own. We don't need a significant other or a relationship to show God to the world around us because we already have God's image inside of us. Can marriage reflect the image of God? Absolutely. Can a single person reflect the image of God? Absolutely. Are you missing anything if you choose to be single? No. Real talk, you can choose to be single. There have been incredible leaders in history that have made a huge impact on the world who were single. Case in point, Jesus, the Son of God who came to save all of humanity and who performed miracles and changed people's lives, was single. John the Baptist, who was a prophet that came to tell the world that Jesus was coming to earth, was single. Mother Teresa, who devoted her life to serving the poor and won a Nobel Peace Prize for her work, was single. Paul, one of the most famous leaders in church history who wrote a whole lot of the Bible, was single. God can use single people to do incredible things. And while relationships are a part of life, they're not the point of life. Sure, they can add great things to our lives, but we don't need them to live the full, meaningful, awesome life Jesus offers us. See, if we're choosing to live a life based on what Jesus says it's all about, then we're choosing the best possible life for ourselves. We're getting the point. You can have people ask you on dates or people ask you to be their girlfriend or boyfriend, and you can still choose to be single. Just because somebody likes you doesn't mean you need to be in a relationship with them. It's about what you want, not what they want from you. Dating, choosing to be single for a little while, or maybe even choosing to be single always. No matter what you choose when it comes to dating or being single, just remember that when you follow Jesus, there's nothing that you're going to be missing out on that God has planned for you. That's why when you leave today, I want you to feel confident that you can choose to be single. And when you realize this, you recognize that dating and relationships are a part of life, but they aren't the point of life. The point of life is to reflect God's love to the world. And because of that, you have a choice. And that choosing can start right now in middle school. You can choose to date when you're allowed to, or you can choose to be single. No matter what anyone else's expectation of you is, you can choose what's best for you without wondering if you're missing out. Real talk. You can choose to be single, and we can experience the full, amazing, incredible life Jesus came to give us no matter what. We can reflect God to the world around us whether we choose to date or choose to be single. And I don't know about you, but that kind of life sounds like something worth running toward. So as you run towards a life that reflects God into the world, I want you to remember a few things here. Number one, you can choose to be single. When we know the kind of life Jesus calls us to live, we can choose what's best for us, no matter what everyone else is doing. So, if you don't want to date right now, great. And if you don't want to be in a relationship ever, that's great too. You are made in the image of God on your own. You don't need a relationship to complete you, and you definitely don't need one to experience the fullness of life in Jesus. So if you choose to be single, choose it with confidence. Because you know you're not missing out on the point of life. You're choosing God's best for you as you go for the real true point of life. Number two, you can have a better outlook if you choose to date. Maybe you aren't dating now, but you might want to one day. And when you do, remembering that relationships are just a part of life, not the point of life, will help you have a better outlook on dating. Instead of seeing that other person as your whole life, you'll know they're a part of it, just a part of it. And instead of looking for someone to complete you, you'll know that you're already complete. And if you eventually choose something else, like to break up or be single, you'll know that you're not missing out on anything just because you aren't in a relationship. And number 3, you can celebrate what other people choose. Here's the truth. My life may look different than your life. What Jesus leads me to won't be the exact same thing he leads you to. And honestly, that's really amazing because each one of us is made uniquely. For some of us, that might include things like relationships, and for others, it might mean choosing to be single. Neither one is better than the other. And while others may make us believe that we should want to be in a relationship, we know that's just not the case. And because of that, we can celebrate what other people choose for themselves. We can be better friends and supporters of their choices when it comes to dating and being single when we see them choosing what's best for their lives. Real talk, you can choose to be single, and one of the best places to do that is with your small group. They're going to help encourage you to go after the real point of life and shine your light to the world. And they'll also be that support that celebrates when you choose God's best for your life, whether that's dating or being single. So, as you go into small group to start the conversation, I want you to think about this question. What's one way you can reflect the image of God to the world around you?